Canadians in Canada culturally are very conservative. There's lots of jokes about Canadian politeness, right? And I don't know, it'd be interesting. Do you think that's true, that Canadians are more polite?
Yeah, in general, I suppose.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting. So
at the same time, more polite, but somewhat more distant as well.
yes.
Olá! Está começando agora o Brainscast, um podcast que conversa diretamente com profissionais brasileiros da área de marketing e comunicação que moram no Canadá. O Brains é uma organização sem fins lucrativos, inicialmente criada por 4 mulheres brasileiras, com o intuito de construir networking entre os imigrantes profissionais da área de marketing e comunicação. E se você chegou até aqui para ouvir uma de nossas histórias, seja muito bem-vindo!
Hi guys, this is Elaine. This episode is gonna be a bit different. It's gonna be fully in English. I'm here today with Tony Lee. He's a freelance creative director and copywriter. He works in many agencies, the most famous ones in Canada. And also he worked in the most important job as my teacher. So yeah, you can tell everybody that was your favorite job if you want that.
Teaching Elaine was my favorite job ever.
And you also have the Crank Ideas Corporation, which is your company, right?
Yep. That's just what I call my company, but it's just me.
So what is the difference between working as a freelance and in agencies as a full-time job? Do you like one or the other better, or just make a variety?
I think if you're starting out in the business, you certainly want to try to get full-time. You need that support, that stability, and the environment of working with other people to sort of learn how to do what you're going to do, right? So I would say freelance is maybe a little bit more appropriate once you have some experience and you have some reputation, you have some connections.
How did you get the freelance opportunities? Did you go after someone or an agency or the opposite?
In terms of freelance, I've always been I consider myself quite lucky. When I moved to Toronto, I freelanced for a little bit until I got a full-time job. And after about 4 or 5 years in that job, I was asked to go to another agency. And I had decided before I went to that job that I was going to go freelance. And the reason for me, everyone's story is different, but the reason for me was I was at a fairly senior level, and my feeling was that the future was going to be increasingly freelance, because what I was seeing was a lot of senior people losing their positions in agencies because being senior usually, means being more expensive. And there were a lot of cost pressures back then. There still are. There's more now. So it seemed like a more viable way for me to go. And I've been freelancing ever since. And that was in 2004. So I've been freelancing for 20 years.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's certainly easier if you have a stronger foundation, I think. And especially easier if you have some reputation and connections in business.
What motivated you to choose this path of career?
Why advertising?
Yeah.
Well, advertising just seemed like an interesting thing to do. When I was in university, I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree, which is a business degree, specializing in marketing. And as I looked at the different kinds of opportunities, one, I thought advertising was interesting. 2, the part of advertising that I thought was more interesting was the creative side. And actually a business degree does not prepare you for that at all. But it does give you a certain comfort with basic sort of concepts, business concepts, marketing concepts. Anyways, I thought, okay, I'll try advertising. I'll try to get in the creative side. How do I do that? I talked to some people. I read some books, and this was pre-internet. and they said, well, you have to put together a portfolio. So I got a book about how to put together a portfolio, and I talked to people, and I put together my portfolio, and that's how I started. And it is, for me, the more interesting side of the business. But everyone's different, right? Some people find the strategic side more interesting. Some people find the account service or account leadership side more interesting. So,
Considering the culture of Toronto and Canada, is Toronto more diverse probably than the other parts of Canada, right? Have you worked with different people, different backgrounds, and how does it interfere in the creative process or not? What are the pros and cons?
yeah, that's an interesting question. I'd say, well, the new world in general is more diverse than the old world, right? You go to France and it's full of French people. Canada is diverse as a country. Toronto is particularly diverse, being the largest city in Canada. It attracts more people. It has more opportunities for more people. And that makes for an interesting environment within what I'll call the Canadian context. So I'm sure you've found, Elaine, living here now for a number of years, that Canadians and Canada culturally are very conservative. There's lots of jokes about Canadian politeness, right? And I don't know, it'd be interesting. Do you think that's true, that Canadians are more polite?
Yeah, in general, I suppose.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting. So
at the same time, more polite, but somewhat more distant as well.
yes, relate that to politeness. Like, I think Canadians tend to be somewhat unassuming, and their politeness comes from, one, wanting to get along with everybody, but two, that distance comes from not wanting to impose on your space, to give you some space to be who you are, and so on. I like to think maybe that's a positive side of that distance equation. People are more distant depending on where you are.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. So for a big city, Toronto is a fairly friendly place, actually. Vancouver, smaller city, but people are more distant, I'd say. That's my experience. It's a little less diverse in Vancouver. But diversity it makes Toronto, in terms of advertising, a very interesting place, I think. Diversity, I think, as everybody certainly talks about now, is what creates the opportunity for a lot of creativity, because of all the different backgrounds and ideas, and cultures, and even food, and everything. You're exposed to a lot of different things, different ways of thinking, and hopefully that appears in people's minds and how creative they can be in terms of seeing the world or solving problems. But is that your perspective coming from outside?
We've had some interviews with Brazilians working in Canadian agencies. Some of them said that it's a bit difficult to adapt humor, for example, because you might offend some people because of the different backgrounds, or even culturally, some colors have different meanings. So when you think that red is better because whatever, the other person is like, no, this means something else entirely.
Yes, depending on your culture.
Yeah. So they feel it's kind of hard. Like you have to have something that is really universal and might not be so free to create, when you have this kind of restrictions.
Yes. I mean, that's a very interesting thing. So, and I remember back when we were in that program at Centennial, we talked about culture and diversity and the impact on understanding and communication. And on one hand, I think that Canadian politeness and conservatism combined with that desire to be liked and to not offend and living in a multicultural society means that it's very tricky to navigate, especially humor, right? That's a general thing, I think, across the board. It's not just cultural from a country, different people from different countries standpoint. It's also different from a generational standpoint. And I think younger people are raised, they're more idealistic, and they're raised to be sensitive to the feelings of others, much more than my generation. Right? Because the culture was much more dominant back decades, right? You could make fun of women. You could make fun of different ethnic groups, right? Because you were the dominant culture and they were disempowered. And now there's a recognition that is maybe not the best way to be in the world. And so there's that sensitivity, right? That extra sensitivity. And that is interesting if you look at the world of comedy, right? A lot of stand-up comics, a lot of comedians struggle with it. Back 5 years ago, say, there was all the cancel culture, right? Oh, they said something against gay people, They said something bad 20 years ago about women. Let's dump on them. And that kind of reaction sort of muffles creativity and especially comedy. We're still working it through, I think.
Yeah, yes. We evolve as time goes, right?
Yeah, but it's hard to be funny because, humor usually involves a victim out of the joke.
Yeah.
And we're running out of butts of jokes. Like white men are basically the only acceptable butts of joke, right?
Yes. Did you have any project that back in time you didn't really like the result, but now you kind of appreciate it, or the opposite, something that you thought was so amazing at the time, and now you look back and it's kind of meh?
Elaine, that's the story of my life. I'd say, and I think this is true of a lot of creative people in the advertising business. At the time, you look at your work and hopefully you're happy enough with it, but you're always thinking that it could have been better. And the other half of the time, you're thinking that you just gave the advertising world a tremendous gift, not just the advertising world, the world, this gift of your brilliance. And then it's not until 6 months, 6 years later that you look back and for the stuff you thought, meh, you go, you know what? That wasn't that bad. I can feel okay about that. And the stuff you thought was brilliant, it's like, yeah, that was really dumb. I don't know. I'm never happy with what I do entirely. I'm trying to be a little bit more supportive of myself in that regard. But I'm always looking at stuff about could have cast it that way, or if she said it that way, it would have been better, or if I cut off the joke there, or whatever it is. And it sometimes I look at stuff though years later, and I think, yeah, I don't know how I came up with that, but that's pretty good.
How do you compare the Canadian ads and campaigns to the ones made worldwide? If you look at other countries' ads, or
I think, going back to something we talked about before, when you're doing sort of a campaign in Brazil where the culture is, I'm going to guess, there's lots of diversity in the cities and stuff, but there's more uniform culture, you can make a joke and everybody will get it.
yeah,
When you do the same in Canada, you're less sure about that, right? So I would say that it affects creativity in that way. You can't be as pointed, maybe. I'd say, generally speaking, for like a relatively small country, Canada does very well creatively. And again, like culturally, Canadian business is quite conservative. So it can be hard to, it's a funny thing. Companies will pay advertising agencies for attention, but they don't actually want the attention.
Okay.
So, they want a certain amount of attention, but if they get too much attention, then they don't like it. So there's a risk aversion to Canadians and Canadian business that shows up in the work sometimes. The work can be a little more muted, but I think Canadians and Canadian advertising does a fantastic job with relatively limited budgets. If you go down to the States, their budgets are incredible compared to Canadian budgets. And they can solve a lot of things with money. That's sort of an American thing compared to a Canadian thing. Canadians tend to have to be a little bit more, to use a word poorly, creative. I think the other thing that's happening in the world now is, and I've thought this for a while, execution is the difference. So you can have a good idea, but if you cannot execute it well, it's not going to come off very well. And we live in a world of, advertising just doesn't just compete with other advertising. Advertising competes with movies and TV shows and TikTok and YouTube and everything, right? And the news. And entertainment has a lot of money behind it. So if you're going to do a special effect, people aren't going to go, oh, well, for an ad, that was a good special effect. No, their world is, I just saw a Marvel movie or Jurassic Park or whatever. That is the standard by which I judge everything. And so now advertising is disadvantaged, right? Especially in Canada. So money makes a difference. People like to say, oh, no, you have a great idea. You're like, it's more important than execution. I disagree now. I think if you don't have the ability to execute it well, it doesn't matter how good your idea is.
Yeah, I never really considered that part, but that's really true, especially on the special effects part.
Stuff. I mean, even casting, right? Like the difference in that casting makes to a script is enormous. And if you only have budget to hire non-union actors, right?
Yeah.
How do you compete, right? Like you have to design your work to accommodate the budget. And too often, clients don't want to give you a budget, an accurate budget. And so, okay, well, do this then. They buy it, but they don't have the money to actually do it well. So you wouldn't have presented that idea if you knew what the budget was going in.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? So.
Speaking of which, one of my questions was, have you ever had a perfect briefing on day one?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know whether I believe in perfection. I think there's a difference for me between the briefing and the brief. The brief is what's, on a piece of paper or whatever in a document. The briefing is how the person, whoever's briefing you, brings it to life, adds in some details and color and everything. I've had some very good briefs, some very good briefings. By and large, though, I'd say most are lacking, and especially recently, I think the quality has decreased throughout my career, basically. And it's not to say there aren't smart people out there, but I think sometimes this goes back to money and time. There's a lack of good original research. A lot of research now is sort of like Google, and that's not research. There's not a lot of getting out of our own little bubbles and talking to real people. And it's when you talk to real people that you get those deeper human insights and observations that will inform a good strategy and a good brief. And people don't know how to be briefed too, right? There's there's I think it's a Mark Twain quote along the lines of, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one.
That's a
And it takes time to distill thinking down to something essential. A lot of briefs now, one, aren't brief, and they're full of extraneous information. It's just like a laundry list of stuff like that doesn't necessarily connect either. That takes work, right? It takes work and thought, and that relates to time and money. When a client wants something yesterday and has no money, then an agency or a planner or whoever you're working with, you do the best you can. But to do better, you need time and money to, again, talk to people, learn about a product more fully, learn about a market, and then synthesize all that information, all that data into something that resembles a thought from which the creative brief can happen and the jumping off point.
And then sum up in 60 seconds.
Well, and that's the other thing, like, I want to say this, and this. Okay, great. We can do that. Oh, I'm buying 6-second pre-rolls on YouTube. You do that, right? You couldn't even describe what you want to say in 6 seconds. How am I supposed to distill it down and say it in an interesting way?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, we're given a lot of things that don't make any sense.
Do you have a process of your own, or does it change according to whatever the product or service you are making an advertising?
Well, I suppose I have a bit of a process. A process related to what we just talked about in terms of the brief usually starts with actually figuring out what the brief is trying to tell me and doing a lot of outside research, because oftentimes the brief doesn't tell me what I need to know. So usually my process, and I think this is the case with a lot of people, involves a lot of research and not just going to the company website and getting a fuller story there, but going to, forums or reviews or whatever and getting the counterpoint. So you want to know how people actually view whatever the product or service is. And it's not always positive, obviously, but that's what you get from a client briefing usually, is only the positives. You have to know the broader context from which people are making a decision, right? To understand how to put stuff to them where they might accept it. So research is the beginning. In terms of the creative process, I think momentum is a huge thing, and we talked about that in the class, where you look at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper and it's sort of terrifying, right?
Yeah.
I just start by writing down the client name at the top, the date, the project name. Now I've got something on the piece of paper, right? I'll write down whatever, a headline, and then TBD or whatever. Now I've got more stuff on the piece of paper. So it's almost playing games with yourself to get stuff outside of you. So to just start the process, because once you start the process, it's sort of, it commits you to doing something. So the most important thing, I think, is to try to gain that momentum. The way I like to work with other people is I like to talk just like we're talking, and occasionally try to remember to write down something. But it's through talking about stuff and observations and, oh yeah, did you see that movie? Oh yeah. And then the more you talk about different things, the more things there are to connect to. And I believe that the reason you brought that movie up is because something in that movie actually came from the project you're working on in a weird way. And you're trying to find that connection. And by talking about it, you might have a better chance of making that connection. All you have to do is write down what the word is, like knee bone or whatever, right? Or by talking about other things, other ads, other shows, songs are a great place to go. These are all to me, these are people who are creatively trying to solve a problem or express an emotion. The problem of having my heart broken, right?
Yeah.
How do I react to that? How do I feel about that? I'm going to write a song about that. I listen to a song, and that gives me some insight about the human feelings that go along with the breakup, which might inform the dog food commercial I have to work on, because it makes me think about the relationships that people have with each other and then the relationships they have with their pets, right?
Yeah.
Everything sort of can connect to each other. And it's, so I just like to talk, as you can tell by the amount of talking I just like to talk and find things in an I'll say an unfocused way. I don't want to talk about the dog food. I want to talk to you about, tell me about your first pet, right? What was it? Oh, what did you call it? Why did you call it that? You know, what was your favorite part about, you know, like all those other things. And then let's talk about, oh, look, you know, I've seen a woman walk outside with her dog and the dog just crapped on the lawn and she's not picking it up. Don't you hate it when that happens? And like, just talking about stuff.
Yeah.
Because talking about life and experiencing life, that's where your ideas will come from. Your ideas are seldom leaping off the page or the screen when you're staring at it. You know what I mean?
So I suppose you never struggle with the imposter syndrome?
Oh, always. You can't get away from it. I mean, I think.
I thought you had a secret to overcome it.
Imposter syndrome, I think, is especially prevalent in the age of social media and the internet, because you just have to open up your computer and you'll see all sorts of examples of other people doing stuff. I just talked to a friend about this. An idea you had 5 years ago, they're doing it now, and they seem to be successful. And that makes you feel like a schmuck because you never did anything about your idea, and now it's too late. And anyways, I'm not good enough to do it. And, you know, we're good at making excuses for ourselves too, right? But I think I keep my imposter syndrome in check, and it's only because I'm old. like after a certain amount of time, you remind you know that you've done stuff before.
Yeah.
You've overcome stuff, and so you feel more comfortable about your abilities. It's tougher when you're younger, right? But believe me, everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. I mean, if you're not suffering from it, I think there's probably you're a narcissist and there's something off about you in another way. You think you're too godlike, right? You need a certain amount of humbleness, I think, because if you're not humble, you're not open. And if you're not open, you're not going to hear something important, see something important, right? If you have all the answers, then.
Yeah, I feel that I have this issue with kind of starting the project thinking, this gotta be amazing, like from the start, or
Sure.
the final result has to be the most incredible thing. And I guess this is not a very good start.
Well, and that's interesting because that's how so many projects start within an internal agency or an agency. Like your boss usually says, this is such a great opportunity. We got to hit this out of the park. We got to make it great. And it's probably the wrong thing to say, right? Because it just amps up the pressure too fast.
Yeah.
Right? It's more like, okay, we got this to solve. Like casual, lets you breathe a little and start getting into it. And once you have something, then is the time to turn on this, tighten the screws and go, Elaine, this is good, but you need to make it great, right? Like take that idea and take it somewhere better.
Yeah.
But to get to that idea, you don't need that pressure off the top. It's stupid pressure.
We talked about already your process, but do you have any extra tips to spark ideas or something you didn't mention yet?
I think one is keep moving. Don't let yourself get bogged down. If you've been staring at your screen and the cursor blinking for more than 5 minutes or whatever, get up, go outside, take a walk, whatever. Make yourself a sandwich. But don't let yourself get into the wrong mindset and get stuck. Write something, read something, do whatever it takes to get out of that and get into something else. Usually, I think my ideas come from when I'm going for a walk or whatever, or, that time when you're waking up or going to sleep, your mind sort of drifts a little bit.
Or in the shower.
It's classic in the shower because you're doing something, you're doing enough that you're distracted, right?
Yeah.
But not doing too much that you can't think about something. And that's the same, take a shower, playing golf or whatever, going fishing, doing some gardening or whatever. Just doing something with your hands is usually a good thing, doing something physical. Walking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go for a walk. You have to focus enough that you don't run into lampposts sort of thing. There's all sorts of stimulation. You're looking at people doing something or seeing a bird fly, which might make you think of something else. It's to get that stimulation. There's not enough stimulation staring at your screen. You got to go and get stimulated and be open to connections. The other thing, and we covered this a little bit in class, is improv. So improv is a great tool for learning how to be open and present. And it's fun too. So that's something, we started out our classes with just the exercise where we point and clap and stuff like that.
That was so nerve-wracking.
But that's like taking a shower, right? You have to think enough to clap. The order, okay, clap then point, not point then clap. Okay, think enough to distract you, and then hopefully open you up to things happening. Yeah.
Do you use AI at all now,
Yep.
or okay? How do you use it?
I haven't been using AI probably as much as I should, but I think, one, I use AI for research. So, I talked about researching whatever product, client, service before, and it's often not on a brief. I use AI for that quite a bit, and it, you know how quick it is. It's like amazing. So it'll help me with the brief to get the information I want. Sometimes I use it for a little bit of headline generation in terms of, I'll say, write a headline about blah, 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 blah. They'll all be terrible. But in the list of 10 or 20 or whatever it gives me, there's like, oh, that's an interesting word. I hadn't thought about that word, to use that word or that little concept. And so it'll give me some starting points.
It's kind of a brainstorming with the computer.
It's like a brainstorming thing. Yeah. So, and then, of course, when you're into like some of the like Midjourney and DALL-E and stuff like that, a lot of time now we spend on not just coming up with the idea, but finding a way to present an idea that is understandable for people. And sometimes that involves a photograph. So in the olden days, when you had time and you had money and stuff, you might get an illustrator to draw something, right? Then you go to stock maybe, and you find stock. Or if you were good at Photoshop, you combine stock and you change it around so you can present the idea visually. Now it's super easy to use Midjourney or whatever to create something faster than looking for the right stock, right? It's a useful tool. It's not, and I try to be very open in my creative process. Sometimes you have what I'll call more of an executional idea. You'll have a feel for, like, I want this to look or feel like this. And to me, that's sort of backwards, but that's okay. Like, then work backwards from that, because I think it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from your internal process and your experience saying, okay, I know how this should be. I don't know why it should be that way, but you can work back to them, right?
Yeah.
So you can work backwards from an execution. You can work into an execution. I think what's important is you're always moving, right? You're always moving in some direction.
Do you feel threatened a bit?
Threatened by AI?
Yeah.
Not yet. Not yet. I think a lot of what I'll call lower level writing is already been taken by AI, whatever Facebook posts and stuff like that. It's not to say that you can't write a good Facebook post, but I'm going to say that the expectation is low for a post copy. And, the limits on the post copy too, in terms of character counts and stuff like that, are sort of not worth it, if you know what I mean. So a lot of that work, I think, is automated, will go automated. I don't like that stuff anyways. Coming up with the ideas, I can see where it's a matter of time, right? So if creativity and ideas is making different connections,
Mm-hmm.
well, an LLM has a lot of connections to make, right? It might not make them the way a human will make them yet, but I think that's learnable.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I don't know. Who knows? No one knows, right? But I'm not threatened by it yet. Let's put it that way.
So we are reaching the end of the questions, and now I have the funny ones.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you used to watch James Lipton interviews inside Actor Studio.
Not for a while, but yeah, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, so I always love those questions, so I wanted to make them.
Sure.
What is your favorite word?
Bullshit.
What is your least favorite word?
Oh, it would be something to do with current jargon. I try to avoid saying lean into it. I try to avoid, well, this is old now, paradigm shift, authenticity.
Oh, really?
Yeah, words like that, because they're bullshit.
What turns you on?
Smart,
What turns you off?
dumb,
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sounds of nature, birds, frogs. I love the sound of water running, water lapping the shore. Natural sounds.
And what sound or noise do you hate?
I hate the sound of people complaining.
Yeah, I'm also like that. What is your favorite curse word?
Favorite curse word. I'm trying to swear less, but I probably use fuck a lot. And I guess bullshit is a curse word too, so I use that a lot.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I guess a different form of writing would be interesting. Write a screenplay, write a play. Apart from that, I don't know. I think I probably would want to do something creative, but maybe a little more solitary. I'd like to be better able to build something, like physically. like carpentry or something like that, or pottery or something like that.
Did you had something in mind when you were a kid, like being a firefighter or those classics?
That's interesting. For a while there, I thought marine biology would be really interesting.
Oh,
Yeah, but I'm probably the least scientific mind out there. I just don't have that kind of discipline or whatever. But I always sort of liked, growing up in Vancouver, I think it was sort of the ocean and animals and fish and stuff like that. So I thought marine biology sounded sort of cool, but it sounded probably too hard when I got older.
what profession would you not like to do?
Probably something like accounting. I don't think I'm that good with numbers and rules.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
What took you so
I'm not
long?
sure. Oh,
You so long.
okay. Well, thank you so much for
Okay.
giving your time and all your wisdom.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but thank you for asking.
Thanks for listening to this episode. You can go to brainscanada.ca and find all the links to our social media channels. We also include them in the description. If you're already in Canada, you can message us and we can add you to our WhatsApp group where we discuss issues and help each other daily. See you next time.